The Washington Examiner has an exclusive about the House Freedom Caucus. It's issued rules change demands for leadership if the GOP takes back the majority of the House of Representatives. Let me just give you a part of this. They expect to take back the House. The Freedom Caucus are the most conservative members of the Republican Conference, many of whom I count as good friends. Mark Meadows used to be the chairman of the group. Jim Jordan was at one point. And they want some changes. And among the changes they want is reforming the motion to vacate the chair in order to boot the Speaker of the House, which they should do. They rallied in order to force John Boehner out years ago, and they need to be able to have some clout in the future to do that. More importantly, though, I think, is they want changes on the steering committee. Now, the steering committee is responsible for selecting which committees members sit on and who leads them. What the Freedom Caucus wants is more regional representation. Traditionally, the steering committee is packed full of allies of the House leadership. The House Freedom Caucus has seen that it excludes conservatives. So, for example, there was a situation a couple years ago. My buddy Jody Heiss, outgoing member of Congress on the Freedom Caucus, he was forced off the Senate or the House Armed Services Committee. Georgia has always historically had two members of the House Armed Services Committee, and Kevin McCarthy forced him out, and there was no conservative there who would stand up for Jody Heiss. They used the steering committee to purge good conservatives from committees. Another thing they want is to allow the committee process to actually work. This is probably the biggest one. An open amendment process where members can amend bills from the floor on both sides of the House, on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican, offer amendments, but also allow the committees to actually shape the legislation. Nowadays, what typically happens is the leadership of the House drafts the legislation and they ram it through committee as quickly as possible and get it to the floor, and no one gets to read it. There's no time. In fact, this hurts the Democrats and Republicans alike. It hurts the conservatives and the progressives. Nobody gets to make an argument to improve a measure. It's exactly what the House leadership says. Screw you. If you don't like it, vote now. Don't read it, vote. And the House Freedom Caucus is taking a stand and saying this is wrong. We are the people's house, and you are depriving the people's representatives of the opportunity to even examine and question the legislation and offer amendments to improve it. They also want Republicans to prohibit legislation from coming to the floor unless each committee of jurisdiction has acted on it. In other words, they don't want House leaders to be able to bypass the committee process and get stuff to the floor. One of the most important ones, though, is that they want a rule that appropriations measures have to be approved by the House by August 1st. And if not, no other legislation can come up, and the House cannot recess until all the appropriations bills are passed. This is probably the most important one. I think it's been since the Clinton administration, maybe the early Bush administration, but I think the Clinton administration was the last time Congress passed a budget. The number one job of the United States Congress is to pass budgets, and they haven't done it in decades. And the House Freedom Caucus wants more fiscal responsibility and in part insists that you got to pass the appropriations measures in the House. The Senate may not pass them, but the House needs to pass them. They originate in the House. They need to be passed by the House. They need to be passed by August 1st. It is the job of the House of Representatives, and they're failing to do it. And instead what happens is you get these continuing resolutions that just jack up spending and no one argues with them. They ram them through at the last minute to avoid government shutdowns, and you don't get to reform the budget. Another important one is they want to be able to reinstate the Holman Rule. Allows members of the House of Representatives to make targeted spending cuts to the salaries of bureaucrats. It was removed in the 116th Congress. Democrats got rid of the Holman Rule because they were afraid Republicans would target Anthony Fauci. They need to bring it back. The House Freedom Caucus sometimes gets stigmatized as the group that just says no to everything and throws bombs. These are responsible changes. It is minutia in the operation of the House of Representatives that I realize no one cares about, and I'm boring you to death spending so much time on my radio show talking about. But you need to know about these. These are the most responsible calls by conservatives in the House of Representatives in a very long time. And it boils down to very simple things. Don't use the steering committee to stack leadership allies and punish conservatives. Make the committee process work and allow everybody in the House to participate in the process as they were elected to do by offering amendments. And require that the House of Representatives actually pass their appropriation bills in a timely manner, and don't allow them to go home for recess if it's not done. These are common sense. They would go towards reforming the House of Representatives and bring the House back to the people and away from leadership. Everyone should support these, Democrat and Republican alike. It gives no advantage to conservatives. It gives no advantage to progressives. It gives an advantage to the people of the United States whose elected representatives are sent to Washington, and when they get there are surprised to learn they don't actually do anything. Leadership does everything, and all they do is show up and vote. No, every single member of the House of Representatives was elected to represent people and to legislate. Allow them to do their jobs. Good for the House Freedom Caucus for doing this.
I really do like